The summer of 1883 in Ford County, Kansas, was the kind that baked the earth until it cracked and turned good men mean by midday. But what Samuel Holt found on that particular Tuesday morning had nothing to do with the heat and everything to do with what a man could do to his own blood when nobody was watching. Samuel had ridden out to the Whitmore property for one reason: a bay gelding. That was it. A horse trade. Simple. Clean. The kind of errand a man could finish before the sun climbed too high. He dismounted at the fence post and called out. Nothing came back but the dry wind and the sound of flies buzzing near the water trough. The main house sat quiet, but from the direction of the old stable, something made him stop. Not a sound exactly, more like the absence of one. A silence too careful to be empty. He walked toward it. Please like this video and listen to my story till the end, and let me know which city you're listening from. That way, I can see how far this story has traveled. Because this one deserves to travel far. The stable door was latched from the outside. Samuel lifted the crossbar slow, let the door swing on its hinges, and stepped into the dim. The smell of old straw and horse sweat hit him first. Then the light adjusted. And then he saw her. A young woman sat in the corner of a stall with her knees pulled to her chest like she was trying to take up as little space as possible in a world that had already taken too much from her. She couldn't have been more than 18. She wore a torn shirt, filthy and thin, that barely reached her thighs. Her feet were bare. Her hair was matted to the side of her face, and the bruises on her arms, yellow and purple and deep brown, told the story of days, maybe weeks, of a pain that nobody outside those walls had bothered to ask about. When Samuel's shadow fell over her, she flinched so hard her whole body curled inward, like a flower closing against a coming frost. Her arms flew up over her head. She was waiting for the blow. She was already prepared for it. Samuel stopped breathing for a moment. He took off his hat slowly, carefully, the way you move around something wild and frightened that has every right to run from you. He crouched down low so he wouldn't tower over her. He said nothing. He just waited. It took a long moment before she lowered her arms. Her eyes found him. Dark eyes. Exhausted eyes. Eyes that had been watching doors for a very long time. Samuel looked around the stall then. Really looked. He saw the iron ring bolted into the wall. He saw the short length of chain lying in the straw beside her. He saw the marks on her wrist where the metal had bitten into skin and left its signature. And then he saw the wooden post beside her, and his throat tightened in a way he hadn't felt since the day he buried his own mother point 3 cuts, carved shallow into the wood with a knife, evenly spaced. Morning, midday, night, she had been counting her days the only way she had left. She tried to speak. Her voice failed on the first attempt. She swallowed hard, like even the words cost something. And then they came out barely above a cracking whisper, "M.Y. Father." She said it like a confession and a wound all at once. 3 times a day. Samuel sat down in straw across from her. He didn't reach for her. He didn't rush. He just let the words find the air between them. He drinks, she said. Then he comes. Then he locks the door. The heat inside that stable was thick enough to press down on a man's shoulders. But what Samuel felt in his chest right then was something heavier than heat. It was the slow, sick weight of shame. Because he had known Daniel Whitmore for years. Not well, but well enough. A horse trader who spent his evenings at the Long Branch Saloon, nursing whiskey and playing cards with men who owed him small favors. A man with a thin smile and a way of talking about his daughter like she was a burden he carried out of duty. "She's sickly," Daniel had told folks. "Unstable. Dramatic. I need a firm hand." And Dodge City had nodded along because it was easier than asking questions. The girl's name was Rose. Rose Whitmore. "I am 18 years old. Old enough to know her own mind. Old enough to want her own life. Old enough to have signed her name to a piece of paper while a chain sat on the straw beside her." And in Ford County in 1883, an unmarried daughter was still her father's legal shadow. His property in everything but name. Rose watched Samuel the way every trapped thing watches the person standing closest to the cage, waiting to see which side of the door they would choose. Outside, boots crunched slowly on gravel. Daniel Whitmore was coming back from the well. Samuel heard it. Rose heard it. Her whole body went tight, like a wire pulled too far. Her eyes went to the door, then back to Samuel, and in them was a question she didn't dare speak out loud. "Are you going to leave me here?" Samuel looked at the chain. He looked at the post with its 3 small cuts. He looked at the bruises on her arms that hadn't had time to fade. And he thought about a night years ago when he had stood outside a neighbor's door and heard sounds he didn't want to interpret and told himself it wasn't his business. He had hated himself for that quiet ever since. He wasn't going to be quiet again. He put his hat back on, straightened his back, and stood up. "Stay right where you are," he said gently, not to hold her in place, but to let her know someone was finally standing between her and the door. The footsteps on the gravel were getting closer, and somewhere under the burning Kansas sky, a story was about to change direction. Stay with me, because what happens next is not just about one girl in a stable. It is about every person who ever stayed silent when the right thing was loud and costly. And you're going to want to hear what Rose does when the moment finally comes to speak. Daniel Whitmore stopped 3 steps from the stable door. He saw Samuel standing there, hat on, hands easy at his sides, blocking the entrance with nothing but presence. Daniel set his water bucket down in the dust. He put on a smile the way a man puts on a coat he knows doesn't fit anymore. All habit, no warmth. She gets dramatic in the heat, Daniel said, wiping the back of his hand across his mouth. Girl's got a wild streak. Always has. Samuel didn't answer right away. He took 1 small step to the side, just enough to stay between the door and the stall inside, just enough to make it clear that no one was walking past him without choosing to "She's locked in," Samuel said. Daniel shrugged like it was a thing barely worth discussing. "She runs off. I keep her close. That's called raising a daughter." Samuel looked at him for a long moment. The kind of look a man gives when he is trying to decide how much truth the other man deserves. "I came for the bay gelding," Samuel said. "I'll take him now, and I'll hire Rose for the season. My ranch needs an extra pair of hands. I'll pay fair." Something moved behind Daniel's eyes. The smile didn't fall away exactly. It thinned. It went cold. "She ain't for hire. She ain't livestock either." That landed. Samuel had said it quietly. No heat in his voice, no fist in it, just a plain truth laid out in the open air where it couldn't be taken back. And it hit Daniel Whitmore harder than a shout ever could have, because it named what he had been doing without ever using the word. Daniel lunged, in a warning. No wind-up, just whiskey breath and fury and the low grunt of a man who has spent years using his body to settle arguments. The first punch caught Samuel on the shoulder and spun him sideways. The second never landed, because Samuel Holt was not a young man anymore, but he had lived long enough to know that steady beats fast most days of the week. He caught Daniel by the shirt with both hands, used a man's own forward motion against him, and drove him back into the wall of the stable hard enough to shake the boards. A horse shrieked inside its stall. Dust fell from the rafters like pale snow. Daniel swung wild, all anger and no aim. Samuel took 1 hit to the jaw, felt it bloom hot across his face, and kept moving. 1 short punch to the ribs. Not cruel, but firm. The kind that takes the wind out and reminds a man that his body is not untouchable. A hard shove sent Daniel stumbling backward into an old feed barrel that tipped and rolled and dumped dried corn across the floor. And then a sound came from a stall that wasn't a scream. It wasn't a cry. It was the sound of Rose Whitmore grabbing a fistful of straw and throwing it into her father's face as he tried to rise. Just straw, just a handful of nothing. But she threw it with everything she had, and her hand was shaking when she did it, and her chin was up. It wasn't heroic in the way songs make things heroic. It was smaller than that, truer than that. It was a girl who had spent months being afraid, deciding that she was afraid, and she was going to act anyway. That was enough. Samuel reached for the key hanging from a nail on the wall. He turned it in the padlock on the outer latch. He opened the stall door wide. Rose stepped out. She didn't run. She walked. Slow, careful, like she was remembering how. Like the ground was something she had to relearn. She stepped past her father without looking at him, and she walked out into the sunlight, and she stood there blinking like someone who had been underground and was seeing the sky for the first time in a very long time. Samuel looked at Daniel Whitmore one more time. His voice was low, but it was not soft. If I hear you've laid a hand on her again, I'll come back with the law. And I won't come alone." Daniel said nothing. He sat against the feed barrel with blood at the corner of his mouth, and he watched them go, and the look in his eyes was not the look of a broken man. It was the look of a man already thinking that Samuel's wagon rolled away from the Whitmore property with Rose sitting beside him, wrapped in an old canvas coat that he kept under the seat for cold mornings. She didn't look back. Not once. She stared straight ahead at the road, at the long flat distance of the Kansas plain, at the sky that had no ceiling. Samuel didn't press her with questions. He let the silence ride between them, and he let it be the kind of silence that wasn't empty but full of the things that didn't need saying yet. But behind them, back in the yard, Daniel Whitmore was already standing up, already brushing the dust from his shirt, already thinking about the one weapon that Samuel Holt had not planned for. Not fists, paper. And in Dodge City in 1883, a man who knew the right people and held a signed deed could do more damage with a pen than he ever could with his hands that don't look away now. Because what Daniel does next is going to put everything Samuel risked on the line. And what Rose carries in that silence, the thing she hasn't told Samuel yet, is the piece that could undo all of it. The Holt Ranch sat 3 miles east of Dodge City, close enough to hear the town, but far enough to breathe without it. It wasn't much. A solid house, a good well, a barn that hadn't fallen over yet. Samuel had built most of it himself over years of early mornings and late nights, and the particular kind of stubbornness that keeps a man putting one stone on another even when he's not sure what he's building toward. He handed Rose a tin cup of water before he said anything that "You're safe here," he told her. She nodded, and her eyes went somewhere far away, the way eyes do when the body has arrived somewhere, but the heart is still catching up. That he showed her the small room off the kitchen. Clean. A real bed. A window that looked east toward the river. She ran her hand along the quilt on the bed, the way you touch something you're not entirely sure is real. That first evening, when the sun dropped low and the light turned the color of cooling embers, Samuel noticed Rose go still. Her shoulders drew in. Her hands pressed flat against her thighs. She was listening for footsteps. It was one of the hours. Samuel didn't say anything about it. He didn't name it. He just walked over to the barn and called back over his shoulder, "Come help me with the feed if you're willing." She came. Slowly at first, then alongside him, and they carried the feed together in the long, amber quiet. And the work kept her hands busy and her mind in the present. And when the hour passed, and no door opened and no footsteps came, something in her shoulders moved. Just slightly, like a rope loosening one small fraction of a knot. Not peace. Not yet, but the first breath before it. The next morning, Samuel rode into Dodge City and tied his horse outside the sheriff's office. Tom Barrett was inside, boots up on his desk, hat tipped back, working on a piece of jerky like the morning had nothing on its agenda. Tom listened all the way through without interrupting. Lock on the outside. Chain in the straw. 3 marks carved in the post. Samuel laid it out plain and honest. When he finished, Tom set down his jerky and rubbed his jaw slow. "You stepped into something," Tom said, "that I know," Samuel replied. Tom leaned forward then and dropped his voice the way men do when they're about to say something they wish they didn't have to. "Silas filed a complaint this morning. Says you took his daughter without leave. Says it's kidnapping." Samuel didn't blink. He had expected something. Maybe not this fast, but he had expected it. "He's calling it kidnapping," Samuel said. "He's calling it what make him look right, and you look wrong." Tom said it without pleasure. He's got men at the Long Branch who will say what he needs them to say. And in this county, a father's complaint about his own child carries legal standing. Samuel thought about the stall, about the iron ring in the wall, about the marks on Rose's wrists. What about what she says? He asked. Tom was quiet for a moment. Let her say it. Loud enough for the right people to hear. That's the only way this gets settled in her favor. When Samuel rode back to the ranch that afternoon, Rose was standing at the fence post looking out at the road. The horizon. The direction Dodge City sat in. She had been watching it all morning. Samuel could tell by the set of her shoulders, by the way her arms were crossed not against cold but against dread. Before he could speak, she turned to him. "He won't stop," she whispered. He watched her face when she said it. There was no self-pity in it, no trembling, Just a girl who had learned something true about her world and was telling it to someone she was beginning, slowly, to trust. And then she said the thing that changed the shape of everything. He made me sign a paper. My mother's land. The strip along the river. He kept me in that stall until I signed it. Samuel went quiet. He thought about what Tom had said. About paper. About the kind of law that moved on ink rather than bruises. In Kansas in 1883, land was everything. Land was the future, water, livelihood, and memory. Rose's mother had left her that strip of river property, a modest piece, but real. And Daniel Whitmore had found a way to take it from her that required no fists at all, just a locked stall and enough days until the fight went out of her. How long? Samuel asked. Rose looked down at her wrist. 12 days, she said. And far down the road from Dodge City, that thin thread of dust Samuel had been half watching all afternoon grew a little thicker. They were coming. Stay with me, because what rides up that road next is going to test every choice Samuel has made, and the one voice that can save everything is barely above a whisper, but it is going to have to be enough. 3 riders came up the road in the long heat of the afternoon. Daniel was out front. Behind him, 2 men from the Long Branch, the kind who borrowed trouble for wages and asked no questions about the work. Samuel stepped off the porch and stood in the yard. He didn't reach for anything. He just stood. Rose came to the doorway behind him. She didn't step back inside. That was the thing that Samuel noticed and filed away, and later, much later, would tell the story around. She didn't step back inside. The riders pulled up hard. Dust rolled over their horses' hooves and settled on the dry ground. That you've got something that belongs to me, Daniel called out. She in a saddle, Samuel said. One of the other men spat in the dirt. Don't have to be ugly, he said. Though his eyes said differently. Daniel's voice dropped thin, the way a bully's voice does when the crowd is watching and he needs to look strong. You think he'll keep you? He called past Samuel toward the doorway. You think he wants your trouble? You'll be back in that stall by Sunday, girl. Rose didn't answer, but she stepped out onto the porch. One step, just one, and stood there, chin up, eyes open. Something crossed Daniel Whitmore's face then. Not anger, not triumph. Something closer to panic. Because the one thing a man like Daniel cannot survive is the person he has been controlling looking back at him without fear. He had built his power on her silence and her smallness, and she was standing in the sunlight, refusing to be small. Eli came straight at Samuel, then it happened in a rush, all flying dust and tangled limbs. One of the hired men moved toward the porch, and Samuel caught the motion in the corner of his eye and shifted, putting himself across the path. Daniel hit him from the left. They went down together into the dirt, rolling, each one trying to get the upper position, grunting with effort, and the horses danced sideways, and the whole yard became noise and movement. Samuel was not 20 anymore. He felt it every year, but he was steady where Daniel was desperate, and desperate men swing wide and leave themselves open, and Samuel had lived long enough to wait for that .1 clean punch. Clean and direct, and ending something. Daniel fell back onto his elbows. Rose grabbed the top rail of the fence. Her voice came out louder than Samuel had ever heard it. Stop. Just one word. But the force of it, the force of a girl who had been silent for 12 days in a locked stall, finally opening her throat all the way, it stopped the yard cold. The second hired man backed off. His partner looked at Daniel. Daniel was already sitting up, wiping the blood from his lip, and then he said something that froze Samuel completely. She signed it. Samuel looked at him. Signed what? Daniel's eyes flicked to Rose and then away again. Too fast. Caught. The 2 hired men exchanged a glance. Something shifted in the air. Samuel said it was quiet and flat. What paper, Daniel? Daniel pushed himself up, brushed the dirt from his sleeves, and reclaimed his dignity in the only way left to him. He put the violence back in a box and picked up his legal thread instead. Bring it to town then, he said. Let's put it in front of the sheriff. See who this county believes. That he mounted up without meeting Samuel's eyes. The 2 men fell in behind him. They rode back toward Dodge City without a word, dust climbing slowly behind their horses, and Samuel stood in the yard and watched them go. When he turned around, Rose was standing at the bottom of the porch steps. Her hands were shaking, just slightly, The trembling that comes after the body has been asked to be brave for longer than it thought it could manage. That he had that paper ready, she said. Before he ever locked the door the first time, he had a plan. Samuel looked at her for a long moment. Then we go to town, he said, and we tell all. Every word. Rose was quiet. Then she lifted her eyes to his and asked a question she had been too frightened to ask anyone for a very long time. Will they believe me? Samuel didn't look away from her. You tell it straight, and you tell it true, and you let them decide. But I'll be standing right beside you when you do. The morning came gray and cool, the way Kansas mornings sometimes do even in full summer, as if the sky understood the gravity of what the day required and wanted to dress appropriately. They rode into Dodge City side by side. The streets were already awake, and word, the way it does in small towns, had moved faster than their horses. Faces turned as they passed. Stay close now. Because this is the moment everything has been building toward, and the quietest voice in that sheriff's office is about to become the loudest truth in Ford County. Tom Barrett's office smelled of tobacco and old paper and the specific weight of decisions made in small rooms. Daniel Whitmore was already there when Samuel and Rose walked in. He had cleaned himself up, changed his shirt, combed his hair. He stood straight with his hands clasped in front of him like a church-going man with a church-going conscience. And if you didn't know what his stable smelled like, you might have believed the performance. Tom laid the deed on his desk. A single sheet of paper, written in a tidy hand. Rose Whitmore's name at the bottom, and beside it, her signature. A strip of land along the Arkansas River. Her mother's land. Daniel's voice was smooth and measured. She signed it freely. A family arrangement. My daughter is unstable. She's always been unstable. She needed guidance, and I provided it. Tom looked at Rose, and Rose Whitmore, who had spent 12 days in a locked stall counting the hours by marks on a post, who had flinched at shadows and pulled her knees to her chest when she heard boots on gravel, who had thrown a handful of straw at her own father because it was the only thing left to throw. She lifted her chin. Number one word. She said it clearly and directly, and she did not look away from the sheriff's face when she said it. No shaking, no tears, just a girl who had made a decision somewhere between the stall and the sunlight that she was going to tell the truth even if the county didn't want to hear it. And no, I did not sign it freely. I signed it after 12 days locked in a stall with a chain on my wrist and a man coming through the door 3 times a day. I signed it because I didn't believe anyone was ever going to open that door. The room was so quiet you could hear the flies against the window. Tom looked at Daniel for a long moment. Then he looked at Samuel. Then he looked at the paper on his desk. Then he stood up. He said it plainly, without drama, that a signature made under confinement and force carries no legal standing in this county. And a man who holds his daughter chained and locked while extracting her consent is not exercising family authority. He is committing a crime. Daniel's composure cracked. She's mine. He started. She is a person, Tom said, and the steadiness in his voice was harder than any shout. Take him. The deputy who had been waiting just outside the door came in, and Daniel Whitmore, who had filed a complaint and ridden with hired men and counted on the law to see things his way, found out that morning that the law occasionally surprises you. That he was taken into custody on charges of unlawful confinement and coercion. The deed was held pending formal review. By afternoon, a judge who had ridden over from the next county had heard the testimony and signed an order setting the document aside. The land was Rose's. It had always been Rose's. Outside the sheriff's office, Samuel and Rose stood on the boardwalk in the sun. The town moved around them, horses and wagons and voices, all the ordinary machinery of a day that had no idea what had just happened in that small office. Rose looked out at the street, and then she did something Samuel had not seen her do once in all the days she had been on his ranch. She took a full deep breath and let it all the way out. Not relief exactly. Something bigger than that. Something that sounds like a person remembering that they exist outside of someone else's story. Something that sounds like a woman who has decided, quietly and permanently, that she is the one who gets to write what comes next. Samuel stood beside her, and he didn't say anything for a while. There wasn't much that needed saying. After a moment, Rose said, I didn't think one word would be enough. Samuel looked at her. Point one word is how every true thing gets started. In the weeks that followed, Rose stayed at the Holt Ranch while the legal details were settled and the land along the river was formally returned to her name. She worked. She learned. She started sleeping through the full night sometime around the third week. And when Samuel heard her moving around the kitchen in the early morning, making coffee with her own two free hands, he sat on the edge of his bed and pressed his palm to his face and allowed himself a moment of the kind of feeling that doesn't have a word for it. Not exactly joy. Something closer to the relief of having done one right thing in a world full of chances to do otherwise. Rose Whitmore stayed in Ford County. She rebuilt the small house on her mother's land by the river. She planted. She tended. She made something from the ground that a chain had once tried to take from her. People in Dodge City told the story for years. Some of them argued about it over cards and whiskey the way people argue about anything they care about. Some said Samuel had no right to walk onto another man's property and interfere in family matters. Others said the real question wasn't about law at all. It was about what a person does when they see a door latch from the outside and a chain in the straw and marks on a post at D. Oh, you keep walking? Or do you stop? Somewhere right now, there's a person counting marks on a post. Not in a stable. In a job that drains them hollow. In a home that locks them in with silence. In a relationship where the price of staying is paying with pieces of themselves. In a habit or a voice or a memory that still comes 3 times a day and takes something every time it arrives. The clock that controls your life is not always time. Sometimes it is fear wearing the face of someone who is supposed to protect you. And fear only keeps its power for as long as no one stands in the doorway and refuses to move. You don't have to have a whole speech ready. You don't need the perfect words or the right moment or someone else's permission. You just have to say one word. No clear. True. Yours. Tell me in the comments. And if you've dealt with something similar, share your story. You're not alone. Subscribe for more stories about standing your ground and reclaiming your life. Because somewhere out on the Kansas plain, in the long quiet after the dust settles, a woman who was once chained in a stall is standing in her own doorway watching the sun rise over her own land. And she is not counting marks anymore. She is counting mornings, and every single one of them belongs to her.